Yeah, I hope you all have enjoyed the morning session. So in the morning session, we hear from our senior director for transport, confirmed we are not leaving road sector. After that, we have this green road toolkit launched officially. And then we have all this session about climate resilient transport. I think these are all to convey a consistent message. The transport sector is still the core business of ADB, and we just need to make sure this transport sector can respond to a big context. We cannot stay away from the core business of transport sector, but the core business need to also go to the next generation to show a different picture. So thank you for joining this session. My name is Chen Chen. I'm a director for transport of ADB's transport sector office. So this session, we will talk about climate resilient transport. Earlier this year, I visited several countries, including Solomon Island, Fiji, and Kazakhstan and Uzbekistan. What really astonished me is actually I saw consistently the challenge of climate change. In Solomon Island, I saw a newly built road being submerged underwater for a few times. In Kazakhstan, they told me just in April, the once every 80-year flood actually displaced about 100,000 people. And on my way to Armenia, I had several colleagues told me they were stranded in the flood in Dubai airport. And also we heard about this major flood in Malaysia, and the last week, the flood in Afghanistan, in Indonesia. So all this just simply highlight one inconvenient truth. The climate change is happening, and we need to respond to that. I'm very glad today we get a good gathering of experts and practitioners in the space of climate resilient transport. They represent experts from the academia, from the government agency, from ADB, from the thinking tank, and also from all these different group of people involved in this space. So without further ado, let me start inviting our the first, maybe share the agenda of this meeting. So first, we will have opening remarks by our principal climate change specialist, Ms. Alexandra Vogl. So she will give opening remarks, set the scene, and tell us what is ADB doing in climate change space. Then we have two keynote presentations. One is on the multi-hazard risk analysis and criticality. The second one is on strategizing climate resilience and disaster-ready road transport in Japan. So after that, we will have a panel discussion to go through all these key areas about climate resilience transport. At the end, we have about 20 minutes for Q&A session. I want to mention for this year, we used an app to collect a question. So if you have question, you can submit your questions through the app. The app is called Event. Sorry, what's the name of the app? Event Air. Yeah. So did we share a QR code or somewhere? Okay, the QR code has been shared. So if you have a problem, please approach any colleagues standing behind. They may help you to download the app and help you to submit the question. So now let me invite our opening remark speaker. So Ms. Alexandra Vogl. So she is actually the lead expert in ADB in the development of ADB's climate change action plan, and is also the coordinator for the plan's implementation. So you can find her personal information on the website of this ADB Transport Forum to save time and give more time to her, please.
Thank you, Chen Chen. Your Excellencies, distinguished dignitaries, ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. Welcome to this climate resilient transport session, which addresses a critical challenge, the urgent need to strengthen the resilience of our transport systems against the worsening impacts of climate change. This discussion is significant because transport is not only an enabler of growth, but also a very climate vulnerable sector. Transport is essential for development. It connects people, market, services. It contributes directly to social inclusion, poverty reduction, and environmental sustainability. And yet, climate impacts like heat, droughts, floods, storms have increasingly tested our transport infrastructure. And Jen mentioned what we have seen in Dubai just a few weeks ago. These impacts not only damage the transport assets, but also disrupt services with far-reaching consequences on economies and society. The reality is stark. Asia and the Pacific is home to over 400 million people who lack all-weather access to markets and service. Transport networks face immense stress, with almost 1.4 billion urban residents lacking access to efficient public transit. On the other hand, total vehicle ownership in the region is growing substantially, and CO2 emissions are expected to further increase and not reaching their peak by 2030, as was earlier anticipated. So our region greatly suffers from climate-related disasters, with 65% of the global annual damages to transport infrastructure. So that's a quite big number. These vulnerabilities demand a comprehensive and a strategic response, as economic growth will only be sustainable if we ensure our transport networks can withstand increasing climate pressures. As the Climate Bank of Asia and the Pacific, ADB's ambition is to deliver 100 billion in cumulative climate finance from our own resources to our developing member countries, or DMCs, between 2019 and up to 2030. Toward this, we committed about 10 billion in climate finance last year, which increased our total commitment since 2019 to about 31 billion. Last year alone, ADB's transport sector climate finance commitments reached the share was 37% of our overall commitment. So the transport sector is really strong. This is about 11.5 billion. Last year alone, ADB's transport sector climate finance commitments reached 2.5 billion, and that now an interesting number, 650 million for adaptation, and the rest 1.8 billion for mitigation. So there is really a need also to increase our adaptation investments in the transport sector. And as we all know, this alone will not be enough to address the climate challenge. In ADB, we are strongly committed to supporting our DMCs in addressing the climate challenges. We recently launched our Climate Change Action Plan, and this charts our path to deliver accelerated climate action and help our DMCs attain climate outcomes. In line with the action plan's holistic approach, we are committed to building resilient transport systems, strengthening asset management, and actively supporting multi-hazard risk analysis to ensure that the transport investments support a resilient but also a sustainable development trajectory. We also recognize the need to provide a full cycle support to our DMCs, meaning from upstream, midstream to downstream activities. Key features of our upstream and midstream activities include helping DMCs develop comprehensive low carbon and climate resilient transport sector pathways, and setting ambitious policies, programs, and investments. And this also includes moving from high-level NDCs, national determined contributions, and national adaptation plan to investment plans and to identify investment priorities. So then we can come in downstream in enhancing our support beyond just climate proofing our infrastructure towards building climate resilient transport systems and enabling the provision of services even under changing climate conditions or during climate shocks. So the transport sector is at the crucial turning point. Infrastructure built over the next decades will operate under very different climate conditions to today. Decisions and actions taken now can either lock in unsustainable development patterns for decades or anticipate future climate realities and remain viable. For the transport sector to adapt successfully, we must incorporate climate risk data to inform what to build, where to build, and how to operate. We also need to integrate climate considerations at the policy and strategy level and must significantly scale up investments in adaptation initiatives. In practical terms, this involves following a system approach with coordination across sectors and across line ministries, mainstreaming climate risk and adaptation considerations into investment prioritization and updating infrastructure standards while strengthening institutions and strengthening capacity. In conclusion, I encourage you to take today's session as an opportunity to freely exchange your ideas and your knowledge on how we can work towards a climate resilient transport system and push for effective solutions and actions. I trust your insights, best practices, practical guidance will empower all of us to make our transport systems more sustainable and more climate resilient. I look forward to productive discussions and collaborations taking root from this forum. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you, Alexandra. That's very inspiring. And within ADB, every day we can feel this kind of excitement, how we can change ourselves. But now I think this is actually a good time to invite our keynote presentation by Professor Elco Koks. So Professor Elco Koks is an associate professor within the Water and Climate Risk Group at the Institute for Environmental Study, Vrije University Amsterdam. He leads a research group that works on the interplay of critical infrastructure risk modeling and network analysis, climate adaptation, and economic impact analysis. His presentation is about the multi-hazard risk analysis and criticality, a network and a system approach. Probably that will enlighten us how we can change ourselves in ADB. Thank you.
All right, good afternoon, everyone. And first of all, thank you for this opportunity to present some of the work we've been doing over the past years and are planning to continue to do over the next couple of years, also in collaboration and for the Asian Development Bank. So the next 15 minutes, I will really walk you through some of the methods we've been developing to really focus on a multi-hazard risk assessment for transportation infrastructure and also really thinking about ways to adapt. That will be a bit more briefly. But we're really trying to walk you a little bit, give you a bit of inspiration on how you can do this. But what I always like is before we go into the models and methods to take a little bit one step back and really think a little bit, what are the drivers and determinants of those risks? What do we actually want to model? What are we interested in? What are we trying? And of course, I could come up with many examples, but just to highlight a few of the elements that could really drive and determine the risks. Obviously, one of those is the quality of the asset, of the road. How old is it? How deteriorated is it? How well has it been maintained? A badly maintained road is, of course, more vulnerable than, well, a well-maintained road. Is it actually exposed to a climate extreme? I mean, if it's not exposed to a typhoon, then we don't really need to consider those climate hazards. And how complex or how well developed is the network? Is it a fully redundant network, or is it a network with a few critical links that connect up important parts of the country? So really trying to understand what are the characteristics of the network and how is it exposed and in what ways. But then comes another layer of complexity that we've been working on within academia, and this is really getting a lot of push within science over the last couple of years and will remain to be pushed, I think, in the next decades, is moving on from pretty much siloed single hazard research to more unsiloed multi-hazard research. And what do we mean by this? So generally what we tend to do is that we take a single hazard. So let's say we take a flood, a tropical cyclone, or an earthquake. We estimate its impacts, but we assume it's an independent event. We assume that then the area will recover, reconstruct, and goes back to, well, the old situation. But of course, life is more complex than a single hazard happening and we go back to our old selves. So generally what we see, a hazard can happen, like we had like in Turkey, there was a major earthquake, and then a couple of weeks later, there was a flood happening, which of course severely hampered the reconstruction. So one specific hazard already impacts often the structural integrity of the assets or has already destroyed it, and then a second hazard may come. Or different hazards may happen at the same time. So generally we model tropical cyclones and floods independently because that's pretty much how the hazard data is generated. But of course, when a tropical cyclone happens, there is flooding and high winds happening at the same time. And you would expect that the science was already there to properly do this, but no. So we're still really working on this, and we really also need more empirical information on how to model this. So there's also a plea for collaboration here to improve those modeling exercises. So how do we then go about in doing such a modeling exercise? So we've tried to break it down to a few key elements or a few key steps we can take along the way to do such an assessment. Starting with, of course, the hazard data. Without hazard data, we can't really do much. Going to asset level exposure and risk, network criticality, and economic losses and risk. And I'll walk you through those steps one by one in the next slides. So first of all, pretty much every climate risk assessment, whether you look at transport or buildings or any other critical infrastructure, starts with the hazard information, the climate risks or the climate hazards. And those come in different ways. So of course you can have the return period footprint. So those type of maps provide you with, for example, a flood map that shows the flood depths of a specific area under a given probability, or wind speeds that say these are the wind speeds that can happen under a 1 in 1,000 probability. So these maps are well developed for most regions available. More ideally, you have some information about historic events. And here comes again a question back to also practitioners. This information on historic events is super limited, at least limitedly available in academics, but it's crucial also for validation of modeling. So what was actually the flood extent and flood depth, for example, of a previous event? What were the wind speeds at certain locations? That is really crucial information, but often very hard to obtain. And then we have the information which is generally provided by the insurance industry. Those are stochastic event sets, and what do they mean? You pretty much have 10,000 different modeled events to really be able to stress test your entire system. And there are more and more collaborations are happening between the insurance industry and academia to push that work forward. But those could be different ways of data you can look at when you do your climate risk assessment. There's not necessarily one is better than the other, they just have different purposes. And when we have this hazard information, we generally move towards our asset level exposure and risk. So generally what this means, we have our hazard information on one hand, we've collected our information of our transportation system, so all the assets, where are all the assets located, what are their characteristics, and spatially we overlay them, so which you can do in any type of GIS software, of course. And what it shows you, of course, directly it shows you which type of hazards are affected by which type of climate hazard, which is the exposure. But generally, of course, everyone generally likes the monetary impacts that it's causing. So what are then the damages to all these individual assets as a result of these hazards? So generally, we do that through vulnerability information. Those could be vulnerability curves or fragility functions. But in short, pretty much what these functions of curves show is the level of relation between the intensity of the hazard and the potential impact it may have to a specific asset. And there are some crucial uncertainties still. I mean, there are thousands of these curves available and out there, but often they're based either on assumptions, expert judgment, some on theoretical modeling, but only few actually empirically derived, again, from these historic events. So here again, this collection of historical information is really crucial here to push things forward. Of course, we can cover all sorts of uncertainties, but in the end, it's nice to start getting a bit of certainty as well in those exercises. And then finally, through that vulnerability information, we can assess the damages, but then we want to estimate risk, which is generally the function of damage times, of probability times consequences. And in a single hazard siloed way, this is rather straightforward. We have different probabilities for different events and different damages, and we estimate the risk. If you want to know the full details, I can explain later. But again, in this multi-hazard context, we're dealing again with this dependence probably between different hazards. So it's hard to just simply add up all these single hazards, add them all up and say this is multi-hazard risk. We preferably really also want to consider this dependency between those different hazards to do so. And here again, there are quite some complexities to do so. And in different projects, we're trying to achieve to overcome this, but it's hard work and hard research is put into this. So then moving to one of the key elements now is this network criticality analysis, where we really want to try to estimate what are then the services that are being disrupted as a result of these asset level damages. And for that, we need quite a bit of information, and that's where this step is not always happening. We, of course, need to know the information of a fully connected network. What is the topology of the network? Where do the roads run? Where do the railroads run? But also where are ports located, airports located, what are important hubs for multimodal activity. And then that information is generally available, but then of course the next step would be what are then all the flows along that network, because we want to get a bit of a feeling on what will be disrupted and how should things then be rerouted and what is the capability of rerouting. So capacity of the network and flows of the network, those are generally really information what we want. And this information combined allows us really to stress test the network and really identify what are then those crucial links to keep society running, because that's pretty much what those transportation networks do. And why I think this is really important is that an asset level risk assessment can show you the impacts that have high monetary impact, so they turn up red and big. But the assets with the highest monetary impacts do not necessarily need to be the most important assets for the functioning of the network. I mean, a small two-way road could have, in monetary terms, quite small economic impacts or financial costs, but it could be super crucial for the accessibility of certain communities or to a hospital. So that's why we're really trying to push also to do this part of the analysis as well. And then we're trying to combine this all together to try to come up with certain metrics on socioeconomic losses as risk. So really translate these disruptions into societal impacts, which regions are primarily directly affected due to either these asset level impacts or also network effects, but also which regions are then more indirectly affected because they're heavily relying on certain links and nodes that may not necessarily be in their own region, but are super important for their functioning. And this links a bit, again, also back to what I already said about this accessibility point. So what we really also want to achieve is to really move away a little bit from just looking at monetary cost, but also look at the welfare impacts that the accessibility of certain elements may have. So accessibility to local communities may be low in direct financial cost, but may have large social welfare cost. So we have not fully figured out how you include those metrics in your decision making, or at least not fully on the academic side, but maybe you have, and then that's good to talk. But it's super important. And again, linking to accessibility to hospitals could be one metric, or how many people are affected by closure of a road. So I mean, we can think of certain metrics, but I'll come to this point later. How do we align with KPIs of transport operators? And there, I think we still have a bit of a way to go to talk with each other. So I've shown some ways on how to estimate risk, and of course this was all in a nutshell. I can spend 3 hours, I think, just explaining the same slides again, but this was just in a nutshell to try to give you a bit of a feeling on what we're doing on the academic side of things. I'm certainly not alone doing this. But what we also, of course, want to achieve, if we have these risk numbers, if we have a first sense of what is the robustness or the resilience of the network, how can we then improve, of course, the resilience? So what I really like is if you take a more multi-layered approach, so not looking at assets, but also at the network and how society uses the network, it also allows you to look at different ways on adapting as well. Of course, one way, if an area is severely affected by floods, could of course be to just build a dike around the river to protect pretty much the large area, which of course could be a very useful and good way to do so. Often it is, especially when there are no dikes yet. But we can also, of course, think about just raising the railway line or raising the road or add culverts to a road to reduce the impact to a specific road. Or we can think on a network level about adding a more redundancy to the system. So if we know that there's this super crucial road connecting this specific community, well, maybe the best investment would not be to super strengthen the road because it may be always affected by floods, even in low probability and high probability events, but maybe we just need to build an additional road as well to make sure this community is always accessible. So we really want to explore those different things. Or finally, if we may want to think about more transformative adaptation. Should we as a society use the system differently to become more resilient? Of course, it also makes it more complex, but it's important to think about this. But on the adaptation side of things, if you're still here on Thursday, during the Green Roads workshop, we're also going to talk a lot more about climate resilience, adaptation, and also how this could be transformative versus incremental in your decision making. So where does science meet practice? I mean, quite a lot of these things, of course, have a strong academic focus with the purpose of being applied, but often, as said before, we struggle to make it super applied. And there's a wealth of tools and models available. I mean, if you look at the academic literature, there will be tens of pages on Google Scholar that have developed all models in all sorts of ways to try to measure resilience and risk. But often they are quite theoretical. But there's one big gap which we cannot solve alone as academics, is really some knowledge gaps on data. And it always almost boils down to having the right data to move forward. So this could be as simple, or at least maybe it's not simple, but maintenance cost, of course, of the roads or railway systems. What are the reconstruction capacities of a country? How quickly can things be rebuilt? Of course, this depends, of course, on the scale of the disaster, but of course it does help in the modeling. Or what are the durations of recovery? So here in the figure on the right, I collected myself the information of recovery on the floods that happened in 2021 in Germany, the Netherlands, and Belgium. And there we saw that road and railways actually took longest because there were so many bridges affected that it just takes really long to rebuild these bridges in a proper way. And finally, I'm also running out of time, so just highlighting one of them more. As said before, really aligning these academic model outputs with end user or transport operator KPIs to really make sure we align a little bit better and things we develop have a much higher probability of being used in the real world instead of being stuck at an academic conference and nowhere to be seen again. So moving towards application, this is my final slide pretty much. So the previously presented approach will now be applied for the ADB for 3 DMCs. So we're going to test our approach for Pakistan, Papua New Guinea, and Tajikistan, where we will assess now this network, asset network and system level impact due to climate extremes, and also develop first set of adaptation strategies to really try to reduce those impacts. So what could be for those specific countries, specific long-term strategies we could apply to reduce the impacts and to improve resilience of those transportation systems. And this will really be a fast-track analysis, really mainly trying to focus, can we highlight the most important bottlenecks in those systems, and can we identify and implement for those specific bottlenecks adaptation strategies. So I'm very excited to do this, and I think it will be a very nice try also to move from academia into practice. And pretty much the key takeaways, well, I think tools and methods are well advanced, but now we need to move more into putting them into practice. Multi-hazard pretty much requires a bit of a new way of thinking, but also is quite exciting. At least I think it's quite exciting from an academic perspective, but also lots of opportunities to collaborate. And especially adaptation, really think about more than just building a dike or raise your road or railway. Try to think a bit out of the box, think beyond more incremental adaptation, but also really embrace transformative adaptation, which may be a higher investment at the start, but could benefit you really in the long run. And that's it actually for now. So thank you.
Thank you, Elco. I think really this presentation is very impressive. Essentially tell us we probably need to revamp the whole decision-making process from all the three levels. So this is not going to be a simple task. I'm very keen to see in the three countries what we can achieve there. So our next speaker is Mr. Akito Kinoshita. So Mr. Akito Kinoshita is the second secretary from the Embassy of Japan in Philippines. So people may wonder why we want to invite a colleague from embassy. But actually, Mr. Akito Kinoshita is actually a long-time staff in the Ministry of Land Infrastructure, Transportation, and Tourism. He had a very good experience in climate resilience in transport. So let's now invite our second presentation.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for introduction. My name is Akito Kinoshita from Embassy of Japan. I'd like to thank again the ADB for this precious opportunity today. So my presentation is about the disaster-ready transport system in Japan. So I'm going to share some experiences and our knowledge in Japan. So I hope it can help you, your work. So let me start with this photo. So some of you may have seen it before. So these photos were taken after the 2011 Great East Japan earthquake, which is magnitude 9.0. So tsunami and the accident of the Fukushima nuclear power plant was really gained attention. But our transport infrastructure also suffers severe damage. And this kind of thing happened, tens of hundreds of places in the same time. So, people have had to recover these things. What's surprising is how quickly we managed to recover. So in this place specifically, it took only 6 days, but it's not a miracle. It's a result of a consistent preparation and a big dedication of those who involved in recovery work. So Japan faces a high risk of natural disasters. We have earthquake, we have tsunami, typhoon, torrential rain, volcanic eruption, heavy snow. So we have almost all natural disasters. So I'm not sure if we're proud of it, but we have a lot. So and the point is, these disasters occurs frequently, almost every year. And it has a significant impact on our lives and our economy. So, which is why we prioritize disaster risk management. In terms of climate change related disasters, let me share some recent events. In the upper left, that's the mudslide caused by torrential rain, which falls into the tunnel entrance, which completely blocking it and we cannot use the road anymore. So it happened in 2022. And on the lower left, you see the road collapsed after the typhoon. On the right, you see several bridges are completely washed out by the flood caused by torrential rain. So these events happen every year, and I think it's gonna happen this year also. So we start to consider it not the special occurrence, but it's a normal condition we have under the climate change we face. This is also supported by statistics. This graph actually shows the frequency of heavy rains over the last 5 decades in 1,500 observation points in Japan. We can clearly see an increase, uptrend, in its frequency. So we have more and more severe, disasters. So the given very vulnerable situation, here are some key points we focus on for a more disaster resilient road network. The first is the preventive measure to minimize direct damage to the road network. The second is the disaster response framework to restore its functionality as is possible in order to save lives and minimize the impact to the economy. The third is the reflection and improvement to prepare for the future disasters. Let me explain one by one. So first, the preventive measures. So it's very crucial to be well prepared for future disasters. So from our experience, we have institutionalized the inspection and management protocol to mitigate the potential risks to our road infrastructure. During inspections, we assess risks even outside the roads, including topographical features, geographical factors like boulders, unstable slopes, and rocks, and also the existing equipment like the stabilization wires, like you can see. We also recently we used drones for faster and more efficient inspections. And the inspection records are recorded and stored in a database and updated basically every 5 years and more frequent in some prioritized sections. And based on these results, we implement appropriate countermeasures considering the type and degree of the risk. And I'd like to emphasize that the countermeasures must be chosen with proper assessment of the situation and characteristic of each places, so that it can work effectively and we don't waste the public money. And recently we also started to utilize laser scanning technology from above, so that it's more efficient and it's quicker to grasp the risk along the road network. Additionally, alongside the specific road risk countermeasure that I explained, we also emphasize the importance of road network redundancy to ensure road continuity during the natural disasters. For example, during the torrential rain in 2021, the one section of National Highway Route 1 was completely destroyed by landslides, and it took more than 4 days to recover. But the Meisei Expressway, which is also the very important alternative route between Western and East Japan, was alive without any damage. So we made this expressway for toll-free for time being until the national highways get recovered, and we made the connection between East and West alive under this situation. Now we keep updated the national and regional road network plans concerning such redundancy. So second is a disaster response framework. So in case of large-scale disasters, the affected areas often suffer from limited personnel and equipment. So to address this, the Ministry of Land, Infrastructure, Transport, and Tourism, we established one emergency support team. We call it a tech force, which comprises 15,000 technical staff nationwide. So these members basically perform, their regular duties, in a normal time. But when disaster happens, they are deployed to affected area during emergencies, and they provide technical assistance for damage inspection, rescue operations, or even supply of necessary equipment like helicopters or satellite communication systems. For example, in the event of 2011 earthquake, the 400 members has deployed on the next day of the earthquake. We also believe the cooperation with the local construction companies are also very important. In normal time, they are contractors for various construction projects or maintenance work, but during the emergency time, they demonstrate they are competent in disaster response work such as debris removal, like in the picture. So to fully utilize their competence, the national and local agencies have a cooperation agreement beforehand so that they can engage in a response effort without the delays associated with the procurement processes. We also need to prepare for recovery work thereafter, so we also make a procurement guide for disaster recovery work. Interagency coordination is also crucial. So basically, the roles and responsibilities of each agency is specified in law and disaster risk reduction plans. But in times of disaster, collaboration among the agencies is very important to make a more faster response. For example, the left, the picture of the joint training with the ground self-defense force. So they came and they showed how to install the mobile bridge. The right image, this is the actual image of the coordination meeting with the ministries and power grid companies to decide which is a priority place to get on the recovery work. We stay updated with new technologies also. So we have begun using the social media data because the residents are often the first one to find the damage, and they post on Instagram or they post on X. So it's much faster to find these damages through these SNS data. So for example, the SPECT Pro I put on the left is actually developed by a startup company in Tokyo. And they aggregate damage reports from social media, and they process it with AI so that they can filter the false information, and we utilized. And actually, the JICA, Japan International Cooperation Agency, is currently working for a feasibility study for this project in the Philippines. The satellite remote sensing data, this is very useful to grasp literally the bird's eye view. On the right, the recovery work can be risky sometimes, so we utilize the remote control heavy machinery, like the one in Kumamoto earthquake in 2016. So last one is reflection improvement. So every year, so as I explained, every year we have a big disaster. So we reflect on, summarize the disasters we experienced, and we evaluate the outcomes of our response efforts. Then we utilize to revise and update the relevant laws and technical guidelines so that we can respond better and faster to the future disasters. So due to time constraint, I cannot explain everything, but these are the measures we take to build a climate resilient transport network. And before ending my presentation, let me briefly introduce one technical cooperation project in the Philippines. So the JICA and Department of Public Works and Highways of the Philippines, DPWH, is currently working on this road disaster prevention and countermeasures technical cooperation project. And the JICA specialists and DPW staffs are currently working to institutionalize the road risk disaster management practices, which I explained before. This is not the one. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Akito. So colleagues, I hope you have enjoyed very much, just like me, from these two presentations, as well as opening remarks. So just a quick summary about my notes on these two presentations. So I saw actually quite one common word in the two presentations is about redundancy. So it's not only about basic connectivity we need to provide through the transport system. We need to make sure the system is actually resilient by including certain level of redundancy. I heard this word from the transmission network a lot. When they design a transmission network, a power grid, always they have to incorporate a certain level of redundancy. I think the same question is coming to us. In the transport system, do we allow adequate level of redundancy to ensure our transport system is resilient enough? So after actually Alexandra gave us the opening remarks to highlight the urgency of climate resilience and all these climate actions, I think these two presentations actually give us quite a good explanation how we want to respond to this demand and how actually we can learn from good practice. Elco told us we need to look at this issue from three levels: asset level, network level, and system level. And when the science meets the reality, there is always actually a lot of extra effort required to engage the decision maker, make sure the practitioners can understand what is going to be the new challenge and how to make this climate resilient perspective into the future transport system design. Akito gave us a real life example from this Japan's 2011 earthquake. I think one thing we learned from the crisis, particularly from the COVID-19 pandemic, is we need to make sure we shouldn't just start formulating a response plan during the crisis. If we have a time, if we have a chance, we should always try to formulate a plan ahead of time. Try to have the plan in our hand and try to make it part of our resilience feature of the transport system. So there is also, I think, one aspect, it's quite impressive. Japan can build back this highway within 6 days. So just have this time frame in your mind. If you don't have redundancy, 6 days probably is also the good target for you to restore the system, restore the connectivity. But of course, we want to have both. I think this is a good time to move to the next part of this session. Now I would like to invite Elco back to the stage in the panel. I also would like to invite another three panelists to join us. First is Ms. Shannen Chua. Hello. Yeah, so she's a bit different. She has a bit different background. She's from the Treasury, the Bureau of Treasury. I think this is a very good enrichment of our panel to tell us how the Treasury will look at this climate resilience, climate and disaster resilience in the transport system. We also have Henning, so he's joining us online. Theuns, are you there?
Yes, I'm here. Thank you, Chen Chen.
Hi, Theuns. Yeah, so unfortunately, we cannot get you in Manila, but it's great you can join us online. So Theuns is an international expert in infrastructure asset management. He's the deputy head of the civil engineering department in the University of Auckland, and he's leading a climate adaptation platform specializing in asset management, climate adaptation, performance monitoring, and benchmarking. And finally, we also have our ADB expert, Rebecca Stapleton. So she's a senior transport specialist responsible for policy dialogue, capacity development, program implementation, and with a focus on the green and sustainable transport as part of ADB's transport sector office. So now our panel is complete. Let me remind our audience. So if you have questions, please do use Event Air so to submit your question. We will get your question from Event Air for the last 20 minutes to actually be given to the panelists. Okay, a very good afternoon. our panelists. Yeah. Let me first give the question to Elco. So I think in your presentation, you have one interesting slide when the science meet the real life or the reality. So I guess the question probably many colleagues in this room will have in common is what kind of insight you can share with us, how to reconcile this kind of theory or this kind of risk-based projection of potential future scenarios with the concrete and the immediate requirement of day-to-day operations?
Yes, thanks for this question. So I think I should reiterate a few things that I've said before, and I think one of the issue that there is really that there's not enough talking yet between academics and practitioners, and of course this is sometimes being motivated, but not always incentivized by the funding opportunities we have. Sometimes it's pure research, and academics are also a bit scared, I guess, sometimes to talk to people outside of academia or just don't even know where to go. So here I think that the ADB plays a very important role, where also through this project where we connect the academic modeling and methods to actual real day-to-day application. So I think that will really help us to bring us forward. And I think another point that I mentioned was aligning also then model outputs from academia with actual operational KPIs, like what actually is measured by a transport operator to assess the functionality and the performance of the network, and how do we do it in academia, and how far is it aligned or disaligned, and can we make sure that it becomes aligned so we don't have to go to all sorts of maybe sometimes cumbersome ways to make academic models work in day-to-day practice.
Yeah, thank you. So, and thanks for recognizing ADB in this exercise. A lot of times when we actually discuss about climate change adaptation or climate resilience, a very real life question is how to finance it, how to fund it. So very often we face this kind of problem. Should we spend more on this capital development, or we should invest more on this maintenance or climate resilience, this kind of task? So I will not ask you which one we should choose, but just to help the decision-making process, is there a way to quantify the benefit or the impact of the climate resilience or the maintenance activity, this kind of things?
Yeah, difficult question, but also a very important question. I think that is something we have been struggling indeed with and that links also back to my comment on even knowing maintenance cost is sometimes things we don't exactly know or would like to know to be able to better understand how the cost of climate proving assets balances with maintenance. And of course, in the super ideal setting, you want to incorporate things straight away. And I think there the Green Roads Toolkit will be a very valuable addition, where actually one important element, or one of the many, but one of the pillars is of course climate resilience. And another one is disaster preparedness, which of course strongly links as well, is where we've already identified which climate resilience measures can be applied during maintenance, during planning, or during operations. So that hopefully already helps to better understand when you can apply what, and what could be the potential benefits or cost when using which resilience measure at what stage.
Great. Yeah, I guess I hope this can give us, I mean, your work can give us some chance to see the application in Pakistan, Papua New Guinea, and Tajikistan. So I'm closely watching that. Okay, so next let's move to Akito. So Akito, you give a very interesting presentation about Japan's experience. We know Japan is very good at disaster response and also this preparedness and management. You have a good experience in the Ministry of Land and Infrastructure and Transportation. If we ask you to give advice to our transport agency colleagues, what are the top 2 or 3 priority strategy you will actually advise us to focus on? Of course, in the context of the climate resilience. Yeah.
Thank you for your question. So I think institutionalizing the disaster risk assessment and management is very important. This is not only about the road management, but also railway and other infrastructure facilities also. And but I know it takes some time to make it scheme and implement the inspections and choose a proper countermeasure and conduct work. It takes some time, but we definitely need this kind of process. So we have to work on this, regardless of the infrastructure mode. And the second one is, well, maybe first, the number one is the securing a budget for disaster risk reduction. DRR investment is very important, and even in Japan. So one of the reasons why we review the result of a disaster is that we have to explain to the public why we need a DRR investment. Even in Japan, after we pass the rainy season, we start to forget about it. So it's very important to review and so that we can explain better and so that we get more DRR investment.
Great. We know in whatever disaster response, actually, you need to help the public understand the situation and know what they should do, what they shouldn't do. In Japan, how do you manage the public communication to help people respond to a disaster like you should?
So, in emergency time, so basically all the relevant ministries and agencies, they have a coordination meeting. They report the situation and what have we done, and so regularly. So basically, we periodically release the report of our response. So the point is, in the disaster time, a lot of information comes out, even correct information or false correct information. If you use the Instagram or X, sometimes the photo is real situation of the affected area, but sometimes it looks same, but the picture comes from 10 years ago. So we have to, very careful which is the correct information and which one should the public pay attention. And especially for the from viewpoint of road users, we have a kind of foundation called the JATIC. So this foundation collects all the data from provincial level to the expressway level, so that user can access the site and grasp which way is active and not, which is not. Yeah. And if possible, let me. There's an interesting system by Toyota. The Toyota has a kind of active map. So I saw it's T-Connect. So Toyota has a probe data from each vehicles. Yeah. So they know which route is possible, which is not. So they put in the map, and then we can know which ways where the Toyota car will be able to go pass through or not. So we collaborate with these data in case of emergency.
Great. I think that's an excellent collaboration between public and private sector. You also mentioned about the image. Image is very convincing at the time of the communication, disaster. I was thinking actually, is the artificial intelligence makes the life easier or more difficult? Because we saw actually in the internet, there are so many faked images can be very easily created, and we don't know what is true, what is totally false information. So I don't know in Japan, have you started any work or any study to think how to make use of AI in this kind of public communication?
I think we do. Because like the one we explained, the spective role, they actually use the AI to process. So they already have a data set of the previous post, so they can process which is new information, which is the fake post produced from old post. Yeah,
that will be very interesting. Yeah. So let's now move to Shannen. So Shannen, welcome back to ADB. So last year we were here for this climate resilient asset management workshop. I think Philippine government did an excellent job to move the asset management into the business of Treasury. That's quite a major achievement. I think that's probably a good indicator to show this is going to be a sustainable asset management effort. So, but today we are talking about climate resilience. Can you share with us what are the principal measures being undertaken by the government of Philippines to improve the resilience of the critical infrastructure? And also, in addition, we keep hearing the word about the Build Back Better, the BBB. How this has been incorporated or integrated in the planning or strategy exercise?
I actually have a slide for this just to illustrate it better. And it goes together as well with what both Elco and Akito have been mentioning, that when you approach disaster resilience and climate resilience, it has to be a systems approach. It can't just be all in silos. It's looking at it in the perspective of how do we build on the information that you have? How do we build more resilient infrastructure? How do we ensure that there's funding available, which is very critical when you want to repair, reconstruct, and even your basic response in ensuring that people are safe? And also making sure that your environment is also something that you're taking care of. We all know that part of climate change, and with the ADB, one of their key projects and programs really center on how do we mitigate and manage the impact of climate change. So I have here this diagram. I did this for my capstone back in Masters. And it's really looking at how do we build resilience as a whole, especially in a world filled with disasters. So it's looking at physical resilience. This is having your building code and structures updated, having Build Back Better, these flood management plans. Preventive maintenance is a key in that, because you want to ensure that your assets can serve the people for as long as it can and can withstand all of these different shocks. Aside from making sure your infrastructure is good, you need to make sure your people are also resilient, making sure you have the necessary safety nets. You have all of these networks, and ensuring that when there is a disaster or your people feel the impact of climate change, you're there to support them. You're minimizing their vulnerability. You're making them less fragile as a society. That then ties together, and I know this is a lot, that ties together with information and technology resilience. It's getting now from the people, let's say social media. That's where you see, okay, this place is flooded. This is where we avoid. There's a landslide here. In the Philippines, for people who drive, we typically use this app called Waze. And I think I see a lot of Filipinos also here in the crowd. In Waze, the users can input whether an area is flooded or whether, not even just flooded, but if the area was barricaded, so that it avoids you and redirects your route. The same thought process can be expanded when you look at potential roadworks, maintenance preventions, or even when you're in the middle of a disaster, a typhoon, especially in the Philippines when there's typhoons, and not just typhoons, what we call habagat, which is monsoon rains. A lot of our main roads actually get flooded and sometimes are quite impassable to different vehicles. It's also harnessing all of these information in different databases for not just the Philippine government, but also for the societies to use and to inform them of what can they do and what are the different risks that are exposed in their area. Our Department of Science and Technology has a very good program. They call it the GeoRisk PH. So if you can input your hotel address. It's a website. You input your hotel address or wherever you're living, as long as it's in the Philippines, and it tells you what are your potential hazard exposure. How near are you to the nearest active volcano? How likely is a landslide gonna form there? How safe are you from a tsunami? And I think recently they also put in indicators of what is your flood level in that area. So that goes for your information and technological resilience. Of course, hand in hand there is now the redundancy measures as well in ensuring that your data has backup. And you want to make sure, especially with all of these cybersecurity hacks, that you're well protected in that regard. These are then fed into financial resilience measures. It's not enough that you make sure your infrastructure is good, that your people are safe. The question is, how do you make sure as government, and not just government, private sector, that you're able to actually fund all of these programs? You can look at your disaster risk financing strategy, access to loan facilities. For example, when we take out projects, program loans, and even contingent financing with the ADB to ensure that we're also able to address the financial gaps for all of these different expenses. And it finally ties back to ecological resilience. We cannot discount the impact that ecosystems can provide and they're able to do in terms of mitigating the different disaster risk. When there's a strong typhoon, one of the key ecological services to dampen the strength of a typhoon is actually your mountain ranges. For flooding, a lot of areas with mangroves are able to better manage the flood because the mangroves are able to absorb now the water. So it's making sure all of these different approaches go hand in hand. You're not just siloed in one particular system that you're trying to do. And that's what hopefully we in the Philippines, it's a very long way to get there, but slowly we're building on that. We're doing it also through our National Asset Management Plan. You can go to our Department of Budget and Management's website and they detail how you can do natural hazard resiliency planning and how we would recommend some preventive maintenance and asset management practices.
Thank you, Shannen. I like the remarks at the beginning. You said risk management or this disaster response should be a system-based approach. Fully agree. I think to some extent the slide you just showed is also actually very much in line with what Elco presented. There should be a three-level asset network and to the system level. So you mentioned this asset management plan. We understand the Bureau of Treasury is also overseeing the National Asset Registry. So can you just share what's your view? What will be the value of this National Asset Registry in advancing the integration of the climate resilience in the transport sector in Philippines?
So the National Asset Registry system of the Treasury is not just for the transport sector. It's actually meant to be the single source of truth for government, especially for oversight agencies when it comes to their strategically important and critical assets. It's a lot of buzzwords, but it essentially means that we're ensuring that we have a good idea of what assets we have that are critical to ensure the safety of the people, to ensure that we're able to provide the necessary social economic services. So you look at hospitals, transport facilities. So we have all the different ports, airports, seaports. We have roads and bridges as well there, schools for education. And these are some of the information that you can find in the National Asset Registry system. This then feeds into some of the risk reports that we do in the Treasury, and it ties back also to some of the things that Alco does. So in the Treasury, we're now working on a criticality assessment also of the different infrastructure we have. We're piloting it now with the schools, and some of our criticality indicators are the density of that area. How many schools within that area are available, whether it's a lone school or there's a network of schools already available? How many students are being serviced, and what is the criticality level of that school vis-a-vis, like if something happens to that school, will it cause a great disruption in that area, or are there other redundancy measures in place to cushion that impact? It really ties together with what Elco is doing and now looking at it from a criticality perspective and the redundancy measure, how we can address certain climate and disaster challenges. But beyond that, and applying it now to finance, which is the role of Treasury is identifying where we have to channel our funds. I think a lot of DMCs here would agree that we have very limited budgets, very tight fiscal spaces, so prioritization is key. Criticality assessments, such as what Treasury is doing and what Elco is doing, helps us to maximize the limited budget we have to maximize the impact on the people.
Thank you. Wow. Yes. So, as a resident of Philippines, definitely we feel proud of that. And I take a lot of comfort from this. Okay, thank you, Shannen. So let's now move to Rebecca. I will go to you at the end since let me first ask a question to Rebecca. So we heard actually ADB's climate ambition from the opening remarks by Alexandra. We also know ADB is actually considering itself as a climate bank of Asia and the Pacific. We even have the ambition of providing 100 billion by 2030 in climate finance. So can you outline transport sector group's approach to advance these objectives?
Thank you, Chen Chen. This is a different question to what I was expecting. But I guess all this is, what I will say is all of our projects have to consider climate financing. It's no longer some, add-on that we want to add to a project. It's the fundamental place we want to start a project from. We've got a range of different financing modalities as well, which we want to start looking at with our DMCs. So we're not just looking at traditional project financing, although that's definitely not going away. There's other programs or other modalities we can use, for example, policy-based lending. And we're seeing more and more climate policy-based lending coming in. This can help us to establish institutional frameworks and policies to make sure that there's adequate financing available for disaster risk response. It can also help with some of those upstream measures on the mitigation side. So both things happening there. We've also got results-based lending, which is a good modality we could use for things. Elco mentioned that asset management is really important for resilient transport networks. So, a results-based lending mechanism might be more appropriate, where we're looking at making sure our transport networks are maintained to a level which allows us to bounce back after a disaster. So I think that's different ways in which the transport sector is encompassing climate financing.
Yeah, thanks. I'm taking note of this so that I can respond to the question in the future. Okay, so now I hope this question, you get it before the session. We know ADB, actually in the past, we consider the capital development is part of ADB's, okay, you're nodding, the ADB's investment priority. Or actually it should be the way to use ADB's resource, ADB's loan and grant. But frequently we consider maintenance is kind of a recurrent cost, recurrent expenditure. It should be the responsibility of the government. But today we hear from all the presentations, the discussions, maintenance is important, asset management is important. So how does this align with ADB's funding modality or this kind of investment mindset to really make sure we can respond properly to the climate resilience requirement?
Yeah, thank you. So the modality I mentioned at the end then, results-based lending, would be one of the ways in which we can help countries to basically by bringing financing to a results-oriented but government-led project with disbursement-linked indicators focused on those outcomes that we want. So whether or not that's improved periodic maintenance or the use of performance-based maintenance contracting or whatever that might be, that modality might lend itself to use. The other way we can support, of course, is upstream technical assistance, setting up those institutional frameworks up front, like road laws or tax schemes, to make sure that adequate financing is available. And there'll be a session about this on Thursday morning. And then one other one to mention when we do talk about, traditional project financing is that we can bring those best practice solutions to our clients and help to design solutions that from the beginning, which are much less reliant upon regular maintenance, where we know that that might be an issue. For instance, we can consider road designs involving concrete pavements on steep sections where there might be a risk of inundation, or somewhere where we know that there's non-maintenance of drainage systems. So, those solutions, sometimes they might have a higher upfront cost, but what we can also help is to try and make sure that the DMCs are looking at the whole life cycle of an investment when we're thinking about allocating that limited finance. Thanks.
Great, thank you. I think my understanding is you're telling us ADB is also growing itself. We try to first accept it's a reality. We need to focus more on this maintenance and the long-term value of the asset preservation. And on the other hand, we try to find a new modality and new approach to support our DMCs. Yeah. Thank you. So let's now move to Theuns, our panelist online. So Theuns, so seems you are still in winter, or is this the weather in
Yes.
Okay. Yeah. So hope you have enjoyed a good season there. So our question to you is, in what ways can the private sector contribute to improving the transport system's capacity to cope with climate shocks or climate disruption in ADB's DMCs?
Yes. Thank you very much, Chen. I am very jealous of everybody being there in Manila. I wish I was there. I had the opportunity last year, so I guess I don't complain too much. The question about the private sector and resilience is vitally important. I mean, there's a saying in parenting, and those of you whose parents will know this, you cannot raise a child in a family. You've got to raise a child in a community. And the same applies for resilience. It's not a single organization. It takes the private sector working with the government sector, with even some of the public sector elements to make the whole system more resilient. An example, in New Zealand, we've got a Lifelines committee that pulls together all the stakeholders, including emergency services, the private sector, and then the asset owners, to make sure that our disaster response is on target. The one private entity that I would like to focus on a little bit is the contractors. And what can they do? I think in the first instance, they need to be resilient within their own organization. The example that we've got from Akito in the Japanese case has demonstrated that, where a disaster hits, it takes a bit of time for contractors to mobilize. And their ability to respond and their ability to mobilize depends on their internal systems and resilience as an organization. And we shouldn't forget that in many cases, a local contractor staff would be impacted by the shock events themselves. So they are victims as much as everybody else, and in the same time, they need to help responding to it. The second point that I would like to bring is that there needs to be a very planned and partnership between the public owners and then the private sector, because it sometimes requires how you set up your contracts, the ability to morph a maintenance contract into a disaster response and the rebuilding contract is often quite handy because your contractor is already on site. So I think, yes, those are some of the elements that can help to make the private sector more resilient.
Thank you, Theuns. Definitely we need to counter the contribution of private sector in this climate resilience task. The next question to you is actually about the infrastructure asset management and climate resilience. So I think in the last few years, we try to draw a line between the infrastructure asset management and climate resilience. So what is your view, how this effective infrastructure asset management can contribute, can cause an impact on this enhancing the resilience, climate resilience of the transport sector?
Yep. Thank you very much for that. I've been involved in a number of countries that has started to mainstream climate resilience through asset management processes. And at first, it is a foreign concept, but actually, the closer you look and the more of these implementations we do, the more you realize that the asset management process is a fantastic vehicle for building resilience, because the same planning processes that you go through to plan for demand or plan for renewals and maintenance, you can use that same processes in the asset management process. There's a little bit of extra information that you may need. There's a little bit of a twist in your decision-making processes, of course, but in essence, the systematic process remains the same. The other benefit, of course, that you do get is many countries that we see there on the stage, the Philippines, Japan, and the Netherlands, none of them can afford spending money on resilience improvements in isolation from renewals and maintenance. It's an integrated process. So while you're on site renewing something, by addressing the resilience at the same time, just brings in so much cost efficiency. And for that, you need an integrated planning process. So it's for me almost a no-brainer to mainstream your climate resilience planning through your asset management processes.
Thank you, Theuns. So this is actually a great statement. Can we see asset management is climate resilience?
Yes.
Thank you. Thank you for endorsing this. Okay, so colleagues, that's actually the end of the panel discussion, but now we have last part of our session. It's about the Q&A. I already received a good number of questions from the event air. So if you have more questions, please do submit and do vote on the questions you are interested. So let me first actually go to the questions submitted here. First, the question is to Shannen. So this is on the asset management registry as a single source of truth. How effective is it in terms of ensuring that projects contributing to climate resilience are prioritized in funding? The question is from Fernando Victor Manikate.
Hi, thank you for that question. So with the asset registry system, it's not just a standalone initiative. It actually is one of the key requirements when agencies submit their agency asset management plan. So we're just in the initial phases right now, but the agency asset management plan is where agencies highlight what assets they have, what are their prioritization. The asset registry system, the data that they provide, serves as your supporting document. And these are also overseen by the Department of Budget and Management. So at the Treasury, we provide the Department of Budget and Management the reports on who have submitted and what these submissions are. And these would help in their defense for a budget allocation for that year. And it can also provide the Department of Budget and Management so to speak, like the stick to make them and stick and carrot depending on whether or not they want to increase funding. So if, let's say, this agency only requested for 1,000,000 pesos in funding, but with the data they provided to the asset registry system, it seems that they would need more based on the asset life cycle, then the Department of Budget and Management can also share to them that because of the data you've submitted and based on asset management practices, we can actually increase that budget because that is what's needed. On the flip side, if you don't submit all of these information and the Department of Budget and Management doesn't know where you're channeling your funds, it can also be a way for them to say, well, we don't know where you're funding. We might have to limit it for the year given the limited fiscal space that the government has.
Thank you. So our next question is to Elco. It's about a good question about EIR. So during the project evaluation of EIR, or cost-benefit analysis, how can we numerically reflect in infrastructure redundancy as a benefit?
Yeah, good question. And indeed, that is also an sometimes difficult question to answer, what type of metrics you want to include indeed in your CBA. So one way, of course, on measuring the redundancy would, of course, be the capacity of rerouting and pretty much trying to understand the limited losses there might be for an asset. So you need to think about it a little bit differently, at least in my perspective, but I'm not always right, of course. But if you want to estimate the continuing functioning of an asset, or at least the continuing functioning of whether things are still accessible, you really want to relate on how things are before and after, and if the difference is quite limited, then of course you still have a good functioning system and a good redundancy. I hope that sort of answers the question, but it might be also so technical specific that you want to talk about it a little bit longer.
Okay, so please feel free to approach Elco after the session. Okay, the next question is, the question didn't specify which panelist to answer this, but I think since probably you are best positioned to answer this. This is about sea level rise. Sea level rise is one of the detrimental effects of climate change. How does such effect is considered on asset management or maintenance in transport infrastructure, particularly in coastal area? The question is from Eric Rahola.
Yes. Again, a very good question. And I think the question is often a problem in the small island nations where most of their infrastructure, especially their transport infrastructure, would be on the peripheral of the island. So everything is almost coastal. With sea level rise, there's two concerns that you have. And one is, of course, with your tidal movement. With sea level rise, we get different patterns in tidal movement, the same as our storm events increases with a shift in rainfall events. So our high tides is going to be much higher, and the low tides, of course, much lower. And in, for example, in Tuvalu, we found that because of that significant shift in tidal movement, there was in times of king tides, when you go from a very low to a very high tidal movement, there's quite a bit of pressure buildup under the runway that was on the coastal area. And as a result, the surface came off. So you see those sort of interesting dynamics. With sea level rise, obviously your moisture contents under your pavements increases. So you're going to have a faster deterioration of your pavements. And then in extreme cases with some combinations of tidal shifts and wave actions, you're going to get overtopping and erosion of your coastal roads. So that is often some of the things that we look at. The one aspect, and getting back to Elco's presentation on the combined impact of storm events, what we are considering in New Zealand now quite frequently is the combination of a coastal impact and a storm event or flooding coming from the inside of the landmass. So you almost get a sandwich effect, and often that can be devastating for your coastal infrastructure. We had an example in South Africa, in Durban, where they had very good coastal protection facilities, but due to the storm event pattern, that was washed out from the inland side a few hours before the sea surge came in. And it had devastating effects. Again, that combination of hazards. So we always think of the sea, but the combination between the sea and flooding from the inland can be devastating. I hope that answers your question, Chen.
Yeah, thank you, Theuns. That's a very good answer. So now I have one question for Rebecca, and I will keep the last question to Akito. I promise this is an interesting one also. The question to Rebecca is about ADB. So can ADB provide proactive financing that ensures immediate funds availability after disasters and minimize loan processing time for DMCs facing fiscal constraints? The question is from Rahul Jin.
Very good.
Can ADB do that?
Yes, we can. We have a mechanism, a specific loan type for disaster response. So we absolutely can, and it's got expedited processing, which enables us to get, the boots on the ground to help as soon as we can possibly do that.
So I think just to supplement, we also have a modality called the CDF, right? The contingent disaster financing modality. So this is something can be even processed before disaster, just to keep this as an insurance mechanism, so that whenever disaster happens, this mechanism, this facility can be activated immediately. The fund can be transferred. The last question to Akito. So you showed how hazards are growing over time. With all the measures Japan has in place, are you seeing the impact of those hazards reducing over time? I hope you find it interesting. The question is from Ian.
Actually, not so much. So we trying to we make our best, but over a year we face bigger disaster and more unique disaster. For example, we had an earthquake on the first day of this year in Noto Peninsula, and this was the unprecedented in terms of the location, because it's in a very remote area, and they face a population decreasing. So if disaster happens in a highly populated area, we have to respond very quickly and to recover. But if happens in a very remote and a low dense area, it's also very difficult to tackle with, because how to mobilize our equipment and personnel, and also how to design the recovery, because we, even without the disaster, we anticipate a population decline over years. So it's getting more and more complicated, and we have to discuss more, so that we can how we design our land for the future.
Thank you. I guess also one perspective is the without scenario. So if we don't do these measures, what will be the impact? What will be the loss from the disaster? After doing this, if the disaster frequency still increase, probably the impact still grow in absolute value, but essentially comparing to the without the measure scenario, still we're doing a good job. Yeah. Thank you, colleagues. I'm sure you have enjoyed the session as much as me. Let's give a round of hands to the panelists and also to Alexandra. Yeah, my takeaway from this is essentially the transport sector, of course, is part of climate change response, but it doesn't mean we should stop transportation to address climate change. So we should decarbonize transport sector. We should also build resilience into the climate, into the transport sector. And this is really a big, big task for everyone here. So with this, I think the session is concluded. let's also give a round of hand to the organizer, Michael, Ian, and all these colleagues involved in this session. Thank you very much.
Yes, so I'm listening.